Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting episode of LT's Laser Lancer Review. Today we will be talking about the events of the Cold War. It was requested, and we are going to be looking more at events that happened in Asia and Latin America. So this video will not really touch upon Western European or Eastern European Cold War events. Please, please, please make sure you understand that before watching the rest of the video. And when you're studying the Cold War, there's no European Cold War stuff in here for the most part, or I will not be talking about the end of the Cold War in this video. So just make sure you know that. Okay? So, first thing you need to know about the Cold War. The biggest driving factor for the United States in the Cold War was the US had this policy called containment, and that was to stop the spread of communism. So remember, after World War II, the two superpowers that emerged out of the war was the United States, and they were all about capitalism and democracy. And then you had the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, and they loved communism. Both ideas clashed with each other. So we're going to look at how the U.S. used this policy of containment to try and or did stop the spread of communism in different parts of the world. Again, no Europe. Please, please, please make sure you study that, especially what was happening in Germany with East and Western Germany and the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. You got to make sure you know that stuff. But that won't be touched upon in this video. Oh, fun fact, a little too early. So, the Cold War world. Here we go. Let's jump right into it. So, Korea and modern Korea, quote unquote, so pretty much from the 1950s onward. So, before World War II, they were a Japanese colony. Most of Koreans' history, they were a doormat between Japan and China. That doesn't sound friendly, but it was true. They were a cultural bridge. After World War II, they're going to be divided at the 38th parallel, and then the Korean War is going to start in 1950. So this is a nice little picture over here. Red is who's communist, and then green would be democracy / capitalism. So in the Korean War, the communist North is going to invade the South, and the United States is so fearful that all of Korea is going to go communist, especially because China went communist in 1949. So this is the first time in the Cold War we really see the containment policy really in full force in Asia, at least. And the United States and the United Nations are going to support the South, and then communist China is going to support the North. It's going to be a bloody war. It's often called the Forgotten War in the United States. It is going to end with a ceasefire. The war is still technically going on today, but in terms of fighting, it stopped in 1953 with a ceasefire and a divide between North and South Korea. We still see the divide today. The South is going to be a technological superpower, and then the North is going to be a communist totalitarian state. I'm sure you see it on the news, and they will have nuclear weapons. However, in terms of containment, this was a success because the United States contained communism to North Korea. It did not spread to South Korea. So our next one, the Vietnam War. So I can talk to you for about 16 hours straight about the Vietnam War. But here it is in about 2 minutes. So Vietnam used to be a French colony before and during World War II and afterwards. And Ho Chi Minh is going to be a communist nationalist. He's going to be a different type of communist. He's going to be more on the nationalistic side, and he wanted to fight for independence. So they're going to fight the French. They're going to fight them in a similar fashion how they will fight the Americans about 10-ish years later. In 1954, the French are going to leave, and that's going to leave the nation divided. The North will be communist, and the South will be democratic, just like the Korean War. So that's very easy for you to remember for the region exam. America will get evolved, starting slowly in the early 1960s and then full force in 1965. This is the whole domino theory that they were fearful if one nation fell to communism in Asia, they all would fall to communism. That goes back to the containment policy. They're going to support the South because they were democratic, but they were still very, very corrupt. So during this time in the Cold War, the United States is going to support anyone who's not a communist. If you're fighting the communist, we will support you. You could be the most evil person on the planet. As long as you were not a communist and you were fighting the communists, we will give you money, soldiers, guns, anything you need. Didn't matter as long as you weren't communist. And the Viet Cong will be the communist guerrillas in the South. Guerrillas means they fight secretly. So not only will they have to fight the North Vietnam Army up here, but there will also be secret guerrilla communists all throughout South Vietnam. So it's a very, very tough war. The North is going to end up capturing the South in 1975 after all the United States soldiers are pulled out, and then that will reunite Vietnam as one communist nation. So containment failed in this part. So our next one is going to be communist Cuba. Just so we all know, if we look at this map, if you don't know where Cuba is, it is right where my mouse is going right there. Very, 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 very close to the United States. Do we want a communist nation near us? No. So in 1959, Cuban Revolution will happen. Castro, who will be the communist leader, will overthrow the American-supported dictator. The Americans will try once again to get rid of the communist government with the Bay of Pigs invasion. It is a mess. It is an embarrassment of John F. Kennedy's early presidency, and it's a real big fumble on the United States' part. It's a massacre. And then John F. Kennedy's greatest moment was the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of '62. That was the closest. I could be wrong, but in my opinion, the closest the world came to ending. The Cubans had Russian Soviet missiles in Cuba pointing towards the U.S. The U.S. didn't like that there was an atomic bomb 90 miles from them, from Miami, and it was very tense. The United States put a blockade on Cuba so the Soviet Union couldn't bring more missiles over, and eventually they came to an agreement. The United States said they would take their missiles out of Turkey, and then the Soviet Union said they would take theirs out of Cuba. And then last but not least, later in the 1980s, we're going to see Nicaragua, which I always butcher. I apologize for that. They're going to have a civil war. They're going to be located in South America. The United States are going to support the Contras, even though they are very violent and love selling drugs. But remember, they're not communists. They're fighting the communists. So that doesn't matter how bad they are as long as they're fighting the communists. So those are events of the Cold War. Again, only more Asian events that wasn't communist China and Latin America. Please make sure you study the Cold War events of Europe and the rest of the world. And as always, you saw it earlier, we are not done. We have to end with our fun fact. So, fun fact, one of my favorite ones so far. Putting candles on a birthday cake can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece. So, thanks, Greece, for another great thing you gave us. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm LT, and we'll see you next time.